Number 1.
Car accidents happen in an instant. With just a single motion, your life can flash before your eyes. Most consider themselves lucky to survive even one nearly fatal crash. In the span of just 1 month, Jordan Green survived 2. He had 2 wrecks back to back, and he should have died in both. Jordan's mother Jennifer McCall Green told us. Jordan was understandably shaken by his near-death experiences, which both happened while he was driving from Oklahoma's Langston University to his hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. In October of 2010, Jordan decided to move home and began taking classes at a local college shortly thereafter. In July of 2015, family says Jordan, then 23, wanted to earn money, but was having difficulty finding a job in Fort Worth. He decided to move 4 hours south to San Antonio and live with his aunt Lisa Daniela Camergo, Jennifer's sister. Shortly after moving in, Jordan got a job as a busser at a restaurant that had just opened down the street. According to Lisa, in the beginning of November Jordan moved out of her house and moved into a co-worker's apartment nearby. Lisa said they kept messaging in the days after he moved out, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. On November 7th around 9 a.m., I got a text message from Jordan, saying he had given his 2 weeks notice into work. Lisa told us. He wanted to come back and live with me for a few weeks before moving back to Fort Worth before Thanksgiving. Lisa says she texted Jordan saying that plan was fine, and later picked him up at the co-worker's apartment around 2:30 p.m. to get food, before he went to work a 4 p.m. shift at the restaurant. Lisa told us Jordan planned on moving from his co-worker's apartment back to Lisa's house sometime the following day. Around 8:45 p.m. that night, Lisa spoke to Jordan on the phone. She told us she could hear noise in the background of the call, which made sense because he was at work. But just 30 minutes later, Jordan's mother Jennifer spoke to him on the phone, and she says Jordan was in a quiet area. Family now believes Jordan was walking home from the restaurant at that time. The next day, I was expecting him to come to my house, Lisa said, adding that they hadn't planned a specific time for Jordan to arrive. But by 7 p.m., he still wasn't there. Lisa told us she went to work the next day, Monday, and didn't hear from Jordan all day. She went to the restaurant where Jordan worked, and was surprised to learn he hadn't shown up for his shift that day. After calling family and realizing nobody knew where Jordan was, Lisa went to the police department to report him missing on Tuesday, November 10th. The San Antonio Police Department sent out a press release the following day, asking for the public's help in finding Jordan. I called hospitals and friends and went to his co-worker's apartment where he'd been staying, Lisa said. We couldn't find him anywhere. We put flyers around town. Jordan's mother Jennifer says she clings to the last conversation she had with her son. When we last spoke on the phone, before he went missing, he said, "I love you and I'll talk to you tomorrow," Jennifer told us. Well, I'm still waiting on that tomorrow. Jennifer added she believes there is no way her son walked away willingly. If he was going to walk away, would he have given his 2 weeks notice? Would he have left behind paychecks, she said. However, Jennifer is not giving up hope. The God I serve wouldn't let this be the final chapter in my son's life. Until God lays my son before me, my son is still alive. 3 years after his disappearance, Jordan's family works to make sure his legacy stays alive. They've marked November 7, the day he disappeared, as Jordan Green Awareness Day, and spend the day donating supplies to the homeless. We put together care packages, and pass them out, and also include flyers of Jordan, and other San Antonio missing people, Lisa told us. We're giving to the homeless, but we're also helping search our loved ones. Jennifer says the act of giving to the homeless was inspired by Jordan's own giving nature. When he was younger, there was someone in the community who couldn't afford clothes for their sons, Jennifer recalled. So him and his brother went into their closets, and started pulling out clothes, and they put together several bags of clothes, and asked me to take them to the people who needed them. He so believed in paying it forward. Lisa says despite the passing of time, the pain hurts, as though Jordan went missing just yesterday. It's really heartbreaking. You feel a constant ache since it's not resolved, she said. We want closure. We don't care the condition, we just want him home. My closure will come in one of 2 ways. He will come home alive, or God will lay him before me, and I will lay my baby to rest, Jennifer told us. Jordan Green is described as being 5'9" tall, weighing 165 pounds, with brown eyes and black hair. He was last seen wearing a dark blue shirt and blue jeans. He has multiple identifying tattoos, a rosary on his chest with a cross that goes down to his stomach, a Bible scripture on his abdomen, the name Jennifer inside a heart, the words God got me on his knuckles, a Taurus on his left shoulder, the letter J on the back of his left arm, and the letter G on the back of his right arm. If you have any information on the Jordan Green, contact the San Antonio Police Department Missing Persons Unit at 210-207-7660.
Number 2.
It is a case that continues to haunt a North Texas Police Department. The disappearance of Prisma Peralta Reyes nearly 2 years ago. The Mesquite mother was last seen in Old East Dallas on April 17, 2019. She has not been seen or heard from since then. "I'm going to find my daughter," said Lilia Peralta, before breaking down in tears. The then 26-year-old woman was last seen at the Olympus at Ross Apartments in Old East Dallas. Surveillance video released by police shortly after her disappearance shows the woman appearing to stumble around by an elevator in the apartment's garage, while on her cell phone. In 2019, Mesquite police released surveillance video showing the last movements of Mesquite mother Prisma Peralta Reyes, who went missing from Old East Dallas April 17, 2019. Video shows Reyes at E-Bar Tex-Mex restaurant on North Haskell Avenue, and then pacing outside an elevator in the garage of the Olympus at Ross Apartments along Ross Avenue. Anyone with Reyes left her job in Dallas for lunch, but never returned that day. She was reported missing after she failed to pick up her son from his babysitter's home. Mesquite police are investigating the case because Reyes lived in the city at the time. Police released additional surveillance video from April 17, 2019, showing Reyes at a Tex-Mex restaurant near the apartment complex. Reyes had lunch with her ex-boyfriend, according to police. He has not been identified by police, as he has not been charged with any crime. Surveillance video shows her ex leave the restaurant, but police say Reyes stayed and continued to drink at the bar. There was an argument between Reyes and a staff member, and she was asked to leave, according to police. Reyes was then reportedly involved in a road rage incident on the road. Police were called, but she left by the time officers arrived. The investigation revealed Reyes appeared to begin to drive back toward the location of her job, but she then doubled back toward Old East Dallas and her ex-boyfriend's apartment building, Olympus at Ross. She was last seen on camera, pacing by an elevator. It is not often that a person vanishes without a trace like this, but in this particular instance, that is exactly what happened, said lead detective Dustin Baird. 2 years into the investigation and police still do not know if Reyes ever left the apartments located along Ross Avenue. There were several exits not covered by surveillance video, said Baird. Baird says a witness saw Reyes get out of the elevator, but will not say what floor it was given the ongoing investigation. He also cannot say if Reyes exited the elevator on her ex-boyfriend's floor. The man was not home at the time and did not return for several hours, according to police. He also provided a very solid alibi to police, said Baird. There was no physical evidence of Reyes inside the building, neither her purse nor her cell phone was found. Police are not discounting any potential scenario, including whether Reyes may have left everything to start a new life somewhere else. There are no other persons of interest at the time who live or lived at the apartment complex. Police canvassed the area on several occasions following her disappearance, but are pleading for any present or former tenants who did not speak to police to come forward. "I fully believe somebody saw something, and I need that person to come talk to me," said Baird. The detective says, as a father, he understands Peralta's frustration at a lack of answers, and vows to continue pursuing any new leads. "I won't give up, I can say that," he said. Reyes's mother says every day is another day she suffers not knowing what happened to her daughter. Her grandson turned 8 years old last month. Peralta says he told her his birthday wish was to know what happened to his mother. If you have any information about Prisma Peralta Reyes's disappearance, you are urged to contact Ed. Baird at 972-216-6791.
Number 3.
When a person goes missing, it doesn't matter how old they are. A mother's desire to find her child remains, even if her child is an adult. That desire is what has been fueling Sandy Sanders since her son, Chris Sanders, vanished 6 months ago. "I'm desperate," Sandy Sanders told Dateline. "He may be 40 years old, but he's still my kid." Sandy's son Chris was living in a trailer park in Monahans County, Texas, and was working with Sandy's brother-in-law. Chris's wife Angela Sanders told Dateline he'd moved out there from their home in Kason, Texas, to work in the oil fields around April of 2017. Chris and his co-workers were having a cookout on the night of August 12, 2017. People at the cookout have since told Sandy that Chris seemed agitated at the cookout, but it was unclear as to what was frustrating him. Angela told Dateline that she spoke to Chris on the phone while he was at the cookout. She added, "I'd been noticing something different about him all week. I asked him every day what was wrong with him because he was acting weird. He said, 'I'm so tired, and I don't know how much longer I can take this.'" Sandy did note to Dateline her son Chris suffered from bipolar disorder. The next morning, Chris went for a walk around 9:30 a.m., Sandy told Dateline. 45 minutes later, my nephew who also lived there and worked in the oil fields called him and asked where he was. Sandy's nephew told her Chris said he was walking eastbound on I-20, an area Sandy describes as an unusual place for a walk. Then, Chris hung up the phone. When my nephew called back a few minutes later, Chris's phone was already off, Sandy said. That was the last time anyone is known to have spoken with Chris. His camper and truck were left at the trailer park. Angela, 8 hours away, didn't yet know her husband was missing. We got up Sunday morning and got dressed and went to church. I didn't call him before church because I knew he was at a cookout the night before, so I figured I would let him sleep, she said. We went to church, and when we got out I kept trying to call him, and his phone kept going to voicemail. After Chris failed to show up for work that Monday, Angela decided to drive there for herself. She called the Monaghan's police department and met them at the trailer park, where Chris's RV was parked. I stayed outside in the car and they went in and searched the RV. He wasn't in there, Angela told Dateline. The officer says there was nothing out of place. There was food in the refrigerator. The only thing that was missing was his wallet and his phone. Sandy told Dateline she found out her son was missing a few days later, on August 16th, when Angela called her around 10:30 p.m. Before I filed the missing persons report, I felt she needed to know her son was missing, Angela told Dateline. She told Dateline the police told her she had to wait 72 hours to file a report since Chris is an adult. The next day, Sandy posted on Facebook to get the word out about her missing son. Sandy says her former sister-in-law, who is a police officer at the Lone Star Police Department, saw the post. Since she knew Chris, she called the Monaghan's police department to follow up on the case. According to Sandy, that's when she found out a missing persons report had not yet been filed for Chris. The Monaghan's police department reportedly said they hadn't been contacted about his disappearance. Dateline reached out to the Monaghan's police department for comment, but hadn't heard back, as of Wednesday evening. My sister-in-law mentioned Chris's medical history and they were all over it, Sandy said. He was on the max dosage of bipolar medicine. Sandy said she believes her son may have gone off of his medicine prior to his disappearance. Desperate to speak to someone about finding her son, Sandy called her local sheriff, Sheriff Jack Martin at the Morris County Sheriff's Department. I contacted the Monaghan's police department on August 18th, and they said they were working on it, Sheriff Martin told Dateline. For the next few weeks, Sandy said she was in daily contact with the Monaghan's police department, but they had been unable to uncover any significant leads in finding Chris. I think that considering his medical condition, I think the stress just overwhelmed him. I think he just snapped, Chris's wife Angela told Quest. All I know is one minute I am happily married, and the next minute I can't find my husband and I don't know where he is, Angela told Dateline. It's the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. If Chris is out there, and is okay, and doesn't want to come home, I would be fine with that, Sandy told Dateline. I just need him to tell me he's okay. Sandy says her son, a father of 2 teenagers, is a very loving, outgoing man. He loves his kids. He loves his family, Sandy said. He never meets a stranger. Chris Sanders is described as being 5'11" tall and weighing about 210 pounds. He has strawberry blonde hair and typically has a full beard and mustache. Chris was last seen wearing a black hat, a black shirt with the letters TCU, blue jeans and boots. If you have any information on Chris's whereabouts, please call the Monaghan's police department at 432-943-3254.
Number 4.
Lauren Colvin Thompson was last seen in Rock Hill, Texas on January 10, 2019. At 2:04 p.m. that day, she called her mother, sounding frantic. She asked to speak to her children, but they weren't at home, so she asked her mother to tell her children and her father that she loved them and was sorry. She also stated if she got out of this, she would never use drugs again. Her mother thought she heard a man talking in the background. After a bizarre 911 call just 20 minutes later, where she was heard running in the woods, then she vanished. On January 10, 2019 at 2:24 p.m., a 911 operator in Panola County, Texas, received a call from a female reporting she was in a wooded area, and she thought someone was chasing her. The 911 operator could hear background noise, and it was clear she was running. The female caller identified herself as Lauren Colvin Thompson during a conversation that lasted 22 minutes, and she sounded disoriented and confused as she told the operator she had fled her vehicle. Through 911 phone pings, officers quickly obtained a general area of where Lauren had called from, and located her vehicle quickly. It was stuck in the mud on the side of a road in the Rock Hill community outside Panola County, off FM 1794. They found no sign of Thompson, however. While the 911 operator still had Lauren on the phone, officers were also able to get in touch with people Lauren said she was with earlier in the day. One unidentified person she was with told us they had been in the area around Sabine River and Forest with her, fishing, and the friend had been in the car with Lauren when he said she ran off the road. He said he then told her he was going to walk to his house to get a vehicle to get them out of the mud, but then she ran off into the woods. The authorities believe the 911 call Lauren placed only ended because Lauren's cell phone battery died. The search for Lauren started on the afternoon of January 10. Off-road vehicles and K9 teams scoured the area during the first night. The next morning, 3 hours away in Fort Worth, Texas, Lauren's mother Tori Colvin awoke to missed calls from the sheriff's office. Me and my husband called them back, and they asked if we had heard from Lauren. I said no. They said they'd gotten a 911 call the day before, and she was missing. Meanwhile, organized search teams were trying to find Lauren, and they located a shoe that was identified as belonging to the missing woman. It was such a heavily wooded area, no footprints were found around the shoe. Around 2,000 acres of heavily wooded terrain and open fields were searched with ground searches crews, and drones and helicopters searched over 9,000 acres. Despite the search efforts by the SAR teams, Lauren could not be found. Investigators believed Lauren may have actually been run off the road, as opposed to accidentally driving into the ditch, as they found paint transfer on her car and on another vehicle. One of the 3 alleged witnesses is now deceased, and her case remains unsolved. There has been no sign of activity on her bank accounts, and phone records have remained untouched since the 911 call.
Number 5.
The KPMG executive was found dead in Dallas, Texas, on Thursday after going missing in October. The body of James Allen White, 55, was discovered by a survey crew in a wooded area near Paul Quinn College around 12:30 p.m., according to the Dallas Police Department. The remains were positively identified on Friday by the Dallas County Medical Examiner, police said. His cause of death has not been released. White was reported missing by family on October 22. He was last seen in surveillance video obtained by WFAA pumping gas at a local racetrack around 6 a.m. after leaving La Fitness. Days after his disappearance, police located his car in South Dallas, but White was not inside, WFAA reported. His body was found less than a mile from where his car was located, according to the news station. I'm not going to give up hope at all. Until they tell me that he's gone, White's mother, Marala Craven, told WFAA in November. Somebody has to know something. I don't understand this. I don't understand this at all, she said, adding, I never thought at 82 years old that I'd be going to the police station for a son that never caused any trouble at all. Rusty Jenkins, White's partner of 18 years, told the station that he reported White missing after he didn't return home from his workout. I got in the car at 7, drove the route back and forth trying to find him. Trying to find evidence of a wreck somewhere, his husband told WFAA. I was calling the hospitals trying to find out if there was an unidentified John Doe in any of the hospitals, because I didn't know if he had his ID with him or not. Anyone who has seen anything, please come forward, Jenkins said. No matter how little they think it is or insignificant, it may be a big piece of the puzzle to the police. The Dallas Police Department Special Investigations and Homicide Units are working on this case. Crime Stoppers is offering a $5,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest, while a private fund is offering an additional $10,000, according to police.
Number 6.
19-year-old Samantha Clark has been missing since September 14, 2010. The previous evening, Samantha told her younger brother that she was going out with a few friends and would be back later. However, when their mother Barbara Tinder returned to their Orange County, Virginia home after her night shift at work, Samantha still had not returned home. Barbara was immediately worried about her daughter, but was told that she could not file a missing persons report until 48 hours after her disappearance. Barbara remained hopeful that Samantha would show up sometime during that 48-hour period, but unfortunately, Samantha never returned home and was finally reported missing 2 days later. Randy Allen Taylor is considered a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Taylor is currently serving a life sentence for kidnapping and murdering 17-year-old Alexis Murphy on August 3, 2013. A detailed write-up on Alexis's case can be found here. 3 years earlier, in September 2010, Samantha and Taylor met at a restaurant off of Route 29 called Northside. Samantha was at the restaurant with her mother after the two had attended a high school football game together. While there, Samantha struck up a conversation with two younger men in their 20s. Taylor happened to be a friend of the young men and joined them at the restaurant. Samantha later ended up going home with one of the younger men, however she took down Taylor's phone number as well. In the hours before Samantha's disappearance on September 14th, Taylor called Samantha 5 different times. He was identified as a suspect early on into the investigation, but he vehemently denied any involvement in her disappearance and investigators were unable to find any other evidence against him. News about Samantha's disappearance seemed to die down a bit until Taylor became the prime suspect in the disappearance of another young girl, Alexis Murphy. Police were able to find DNA evidence that Taylor had kidnapped, murdered, and disposed of Alexis. He was ultimately convicted in Alexis's case, which only reinforced the earlier beliefs that he was involved in Samantha's 2010 disappearance as well. Taylor still denies involvement in Samantha's case. He also claims he was wrongfully convicted in Alexis's case as well. Neither women have ever been found. Police are still investigating Samantha's case. If you have any information, please report it here. In January 2021, authorities in Orange County announced that they are now investigating Samantha's case as a murder. Samantha still remains missing, but detectives reportedly have new evidence that led to the shift in this investigation. The chief of police stated that new information and advances in investigative and forensic technology is what ultimately sparked the murder reclassification. At this time, investigators are not revealing any details about the new evidence. Investigators also have not elaborated on whether or not this new evidence has any connection to Randy Allen Taylor. The chief explained, "It's no secret that Randy Taylor was one of the last people to have contact with Samantha Clark. Beyond that, we're not going to comment any further." The investigation is still ongoing, and police are still encouraging anyone with information about Samantha's whereabouts to contact them. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of McKinn Darren Smith, please contact the St. George Police Department at 435-627-4300 or call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 800-843-5678.
Number 7.
19-year-old Samantha Clark has been missing since September 14, 2010. The previous evening, Samantha told her younger brother that she was going out with a few friends and would be back later. However, when their mother Barbara Tinder returned to their Orange County, Virginia home after her night shift at work, Samantha still had not returned home. Barbara was immediately worried about her daughter, but was told that she could not file a missing persons report until 48 hours after her disappearance. Barbara remained hopeful that Samantha would show up sometime during that 48-hour period, but unfortunately, Samantha never returned home and was finally reported missing 2 days later. Randy Allen Taylor is considered a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Taylor is currently serving a life sentence for kidnapping and murdering 17-year-old Alexis Murphy on August 3, 2013. 3 years earlier, in September 2010, Samantha and Taylor met at a restaurant off of Route 29 called Northside. Samantha was at the restaurant with her mother after the two had attended a high school football game together. While there, Samantha struck up a conversation with two younger men in their 20s. Taylor happened to be a friend of the young men and joined them at the restaurant. Samantha later ended up going home with one of the younger men, however she took down Taylor's phone number as well. In the hours before Samantha's disappearance on September 14th, Taylor called Samantha 5 different times. He was identified as a suspect early on into the investigation, but he vehemently denied any involvement in her disappearance and investigators were unable to find any other evidence against him. News about Samantha's disappearance seemed to die down a bit until Taylor became the prime suspect in the disappearance of another young girl, Alexis Murphy. Police were able to find DNA evidence that Taylor had kidnapped, murdered, and disposed of Alexis. He was ultimately convicted in Alexis's case. which only reinforced the earlier beliefs that he was involved in Samantha's 2010 disappearance as well. Taylor still denies involvement in Samantha's case. He also claims he was wrongfully convicted in Alexis's case as well. Neither women have ever been found. Police are still investigating Samantha's case. If you have any information, please report it here. In January 2021, authorities in Orange County announced that they are now investigating Samantha's case as a murder. Samantha still remains missing, but detectives reportedly have new evidence that led to the shift in this investigation. The chief of police stated that new information and advances in investigative and forensic technology is what ultimately sparked the murder reclassification. At this time, investigators are not revealing any details about the new evidence. Investigators also have not elaborated on whether or not this new evidence has any connection to Randy Allen Taylor. The chief explained, "It's no secret that Randy Taylor was one of the last people to have contact with Samantha Clark. Beyond that, we're not going to comment any further." The investigation is still ongoing, and police are still encouraging anyone with information about Samantha's whereabouts to contact them.
Number 8.
In the hustle and bustle of New Year's Eve, it's easy for items like car keys or coats to be misplaced. What isn't expected, though, is for a loved one to disappear. 27-year-old Ben Coffey was in Gloucester, Virginia, when he last spoke to a friend around dinner time on New Year's Eve 2012, according to his mother Nancy, who has requested her last name be omitted. Nancy says family had last spoken to Ben on Christmas Day, when they'd gathered to celebrate the holiday. Of course, at that point, he was a grown man, so we didn't necessarily speak with him every day, Nancy told us. Nancy says her son told a friend he was going home for the night, because he was tired. Unbeknownst to Nancy at the time, Ben never made it home. The next day, according to the Virginia State Police, authorities found Ben's van in Tappahannock, Virginia, about 1 hour away from where Ben was last seen. On New Year's Day 2013, Tappahannock police responded to a report of a disabled vehicle on Route 698, also known as Hobbs Hole Drive, in the town of Tappahannock. A Virginia State Police press release reads, "Police found a 1998 Dodge full-size van abandoned on the side of the road. The vehicle was registered to Coffey. There were numerous personal items belonging to Coffey still inside the van, along with a dog." The press release continues to say Ben's dog, Clue, had been taken to a nearby animal shelter before being returned to Ben's family. Terry Coffey, Ben's father and Nancy's ex-husband, told local media that police contacted him on January 3rd to tell him Ben's car had been found. "You don't leave your van on the side of the road, basically in a ditch, and disappear," Ben's father Terry said. Ben's mother Nancy told us that authorities initially went to Terry's house because Ben's van was registered to his father's address. "Ben's father called me right away," Nancy said. "I spent that whole night calling Ben's friends and asking if they had heard from him or knew where he was." Terry told local media that the family reported their son missing that day, and investigators soon conducted a search of the area near where Ben's car had been found. A bloodhound traced his scent to a swamp, and they lost the scent, Terry said. "To put it bluntly, to know whether he's alive or not is difficult. Because this kind of situation, you're always searching and thinking and looking." Nancy said that friends and family initially thought Ben may have gone away for the weekend of his own accord. "He was very much a free spirit and was known to take off for a weekend," Nancy said. "But once a month had passed, we knew better than that. We quickly knew that something wasn't right." We were unable to reach investigators with the Virginia State Police by Tuesday afternoon, but Nancy confirmed to us that the family is offering a $10,000 reward for information that either leads to Ben's whereabouts or an arrest and conviction in his case. "My hope is that, by getting the word out, people might take a second look at their properties," Nancy said. Each year around the anniversary of Ben's disappearance, his family posts on the Help Us Find Ben Coffey Facebook page about the pain they still feel. "We are missing Ben Coffey during this holiday season. Our hearts are heavy as we remember the fun Christmas celebrations together," a post read. "We continue to look for Ben and still hope that we will find answers." Ben Coffey is 5'6" tall and weighs approximately 150 pounds. He has short, brown hair, hazel eyes, and the symbol for the band Coheed Cambria tattooed on his right arm. Ben was last seen wearing a tan Carhartt brand jacket, jeans, and leather boots. Anyone with information on Ben's disappearance is asked to please call Virginia State Police Special Agent A.S. Witt at 804-537-6770.
Number 9.
Mike and Joan Renee Cook had a tumultuous marriage. They were never happy, Joan's sister Carol Huffman Beyer told us. It was more of a comfort thing for both of them. The couple lived in Salem, Virginia with their young daughter, Ashlyn. But in 2007, Mike moved to Des Moines, Iowa to find a job, with plans for Joan and Ashlyn to join him once he was settled. Meanwhile, though, Joan was also settling down, herself. She'd gotten a new job, and a new man. According to Carol, just 3 months after moving to Des Moines, Mike found out about Joan's new relationship and moved back to Salem. Carol told us that's when Mike and Joan's rocky relationship took a turn for the worse. She says Mike started stalking Joan and her new boyfriend. Mike had done a couple of things, Carol said. He'd sit outside their work and wait to watch them come out. She says one weekend she saw him putting nails behind her tires. I confronted him on it and he said, "It was just a stupid thing I did," Carol said. She added, however, that, to her knowledge, her brother-in-law never made specific threats or showed violence. By the end of 2009, Carol says Joan was living with her new boyfriend. Which wasn't right, she knew our feelings on it, Carol told us. She eventually wanted to get a divorce from Mike, but she couldn't afford it at the time. Joan's new boyfriend had a daughter, and had visitation with her every other weekend. On those weekends, Joan would stay with Mike and Ashlyn at the family home where they still lived. On January 24, 2010, during one of those weekend stays, everything changed. Carol says it was cold that night and raining, certainly not ideal weather for a late-night walk around the neighborhood to see a friend. Carol says Mike told her that the evening Joan left had been a completely normal night. The Roanoke County Police Department did not respond to his request for comment by publication time, but they told NBC affiliate WSLS that Joan left her home around 11 o'clock that night. Authorities say their last trace of the 44-year-old was a text from her phone to the friend she was allegedly going to see the night she vanished. The text was sent around 5 a.m. on January 25, just 6 hours after she was last seen, and simply read, "I love you." Carol found out about Joan's disappearance when Joan's work called a few days later and said her sister hadn't shown up for a couple of shifts. "I was not able to get in touch with her," Carol told us. "I talked to her husband, and he said the last time he'd seen her was on the night of the 24th, when she had set off on foot for her friend's house." Carol said Mike told her he hadn't reported Joan missing yet, because he figured she was still around somewhere. She had been living with her new boyfriend, so Mike wouldn't see her every day anyway. The Roanoke County Police told WSLS Mike then reported Joan missing, and the investigation began. The police department used cadaver dogs in the front and backyard of their home, Carol told us. There was no blood evidence anywhere. Just proof. She was gone. Carol told us the police ruled out Joan's new boyfriend as a suspect because he was out of town with his daughter that weekend. Carol said Mike has told police he and his wife weren't arguing the night Joan vanished, and in Ashlyn's interview with authorities, the then 7-year-old told police she didn't hear anything loud or out of the ordinary in the house that night. Carol, though, believes Mike knows more than he's saying. "I truly think something happened between the two of them," Carol told us. "And as the last person to have seen Joan, he is the only one who knows anything." Police also believe someone close to the family knows what happened. While nobody has been charged in connection with Joan's disappearance, now retired Roanoke County Police Department Commander David McMillan told WSLS in 2015 that he was optimistic about her case being solved. "With witnesses, time usually helps us, because they have time to think about it, to learn more and then make decisions to come forward," Commander McMillan told WSLS. Carol said Joan's daughter Ashlyn lived with her for a few months following Joan's disappearance, but she and her dad Mike have since moved back to Des Moines, Iowa. "My family has a slight relationship with Mike, only because of Ashlyn," Carol told us. "We can talk on the phone." Joan's disappearance has caused pain for many of her family members. "The ordeal caused my mother to have a mental breakdown. It's been rough on her," Carol said. "And our dad passed away about a year and a few months ago, so we'd like to have her home, to put her beside him. Our biggest desire is justice," Carol added. Joan Renee Cook is described as being 5'6" tall and weighing 120 pounds. Both of her ears are pierced and she has 2 known tattoos. A frog on her lower middle back and a string of flowers around one ankle. For more on Joan's case, visit the Find Joan Renee Cook Facebook page. If you have any information on Joan Renee Cook's disappearance, please call the Roanoke County Police Department at 540-562-3265.
Number 10.
Like clockwork on June 30, 2014, Janet Renee Field called her parents from the Scottsville, Virginia home she shared with her husband, Lewis Edwin Field. It was a weekly routine, and Renee, as family called her, never missed their Monday date. She seemed okay then. She didn't seem to be upset, Renee's father Ivan Branch told us. Everything was normal. The next phone call from the field home to Renee's parents in Lexington, Virginia came only 3 days later, on July 2nd. It wasn't yet time for their weekly call. And it wasn't Renee calling. Renee's husband Louis called me at 11:30 that night and wanted to know if Renee was at our house, Ivan told us. I told him that she wasn't. That's when he told me Renee had left around 1 p.m. in her car, on her own, and hadn't come home since. After getting off the phone with Louis, Ivan says he tried calling his daughter's phone himself. It was ringing, but she didn't pick up. Nobody could reach Renee. Captain David Wells with the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office told us Renee's husband Louis came to the sheriff's office the next day to file a missing persons report. He said he last saw his wife the day before, July 2, when she left home after the couple had a small argument. The way it was initially reported, it didn't sound anything extraordinary, Captain Wells told us, explaining that it's not uncommon for husbands and wives to get into fights and need a day or two apart. But the original deputy who took the report ended up calling me fairly quickly because something didn't seem right. Something didn't click. Captain Wells said an investigation began immediately, but the circumstances of the case gave them few avenues to explore. She was a fairly isolated person. We talked to her neighbors, but Renee lived on a 22-acre piece of land, so it's not like you can canvass the neighborhood and ask if neighbors saw or heard anything. There weren't a lot of possible witnesses to interview, he said. Captain Wells said Renee, 49 at the time of her disappearance, didn't have any social media accounts, which placed her even further off the grid. We started doing the usual things to try to track people, tracking her cell phone, credit card, etc., he told us. We didn't find anything of significance. Nothing that was helpful to locate her. Renee's second cousin Bridget Cooper Worley, who had grown up with Renee in Lexington, told us she knew there was no possibility she left on her own. She always was a very private person. She only talked to a few people. She didn't leave the house a whole lot, Bridget said. I just cannot see her up and leaving, and not letting her family know what was going on. She is extremely fond of her cats. Everybody says she would never leave those cats unattended because they were her children, Captain Wells told us. It goes to disprove the theory that she met some guy and moved away of her own volition. But a break which police would learn to be rare in this case came just the next day. On July 4th, we were checking the area for cars and parking lots, and her car was found probably 20 miles from her house, just over the county line, Captain Wells said. A news release says her car, a 2010 Burgundy Subaru Forester, VI registration WNP 2591, was found at a park and ride in nearby Zions Crossroads, Virginia. There was nothing out of the ordinary with the car, Captain Wells added. No broken windows, no blood stains. It just looked like someone parked their car there. Renee's second cousin Bridget told us that since Renee didn't work or have any friends in the area the car was found, the car's location didn't make any sense. To me, with Renee being such a private person, I can't even understand why her car would have been at that park and ride where her car was found, she said. Captain Wells told us that, to protect the integrity of the investigation, he wasn't able to comment on specific items that were not found in the car. However, he told us, since it was Renee's car, her DNA is going to be all over it, regardless of if she drove it that day, or days earlier. And your significant other probably rides with you a bunch, so their DNA is going to be in the car. So the presence or absence doesn't really tell us anything, he added. Captain Wells said authorities brought in bloodhounds and cadaver dogs to search the woods surrounding the park and ride, but nothing of significance was recovered. Although the park and ride area was semi-busy, Captain Wells said there weren't a lot of surveillance cameras to check. Even the surveillance cameras that are in the area aren't aimed directly at the park and ride, he told us. We checked as best we could, but did not see her car driving into the park and ride. I have no way of knowing who put that car there. Renee's father Ivan, who lives about 90 minutes away, in Renee's hometown of Lexington, Virginia, says he and his wife Irene drove to Scottsville after their daughter went missing. That's when, he told us, he found out about some marital problems that Renee's husband Louis had mentioned to police. I never knew they were having problems until any of this happened, Ivan said. I would have told her to just let him go. She probably didn't want me to be worried. Well, what do you think I'm doing now? Captain Wells confirmed that authorities became aware of the alleged marital problems during their interviews with Renee's husband Louis. Obviously, in any case where a wife goes missing, statistically people always look at the husband first, Captain Wells said. We have interviewed the husband at depth on some things, and are not 100% satisfied with some of his answers. He's a very flat person, so he's difficult to get a read on. Captain Wells told us that while Field initially cooperated with authorities, results of a polygraph test showed indicators of deception. Police and Renee's family said Lewis Field has since sold his and Renee's home and moved to Texas. Field did not reply to our repeated requests for comment. During the course of the investigation, I got enough probable cause to execute a search warrant on the Field dwelling, with the help of the state police, Captain Wells told us. Cadaver dogs also searched the 22 acres, he added, but did not find anything leading to Renee. Captain Wells said authorities have tracked down every alert they've received over the past 4 years to try to locate Renee. One of the neighbors said they saw Lewis with a refrigerator in the back of his truck after she went missing, he recalled. So we went to the dump and found the fridge, but there was nothing suspicious. Renee's mother died from ongoing health issues on November 7, 2014, less than 5 months after her daughter disappeared. She was 82 years old. She grieved herself to death, Ivan told us about his wife. So I lost my wife and my daughter within months of each other. It hasn't been easy. I feel so bad for Ivan, he's such a nice fellow, Captain Wells told us. Now widowed, Ivan feels even more compelled to find justice for his daughter. I'd like to have some closure. I'd like to know how she was killed and where her body was dumped, Ivan told us. I think she is dead, and the investigators seem to think so, too. I hate to think that. I hope someday she'll be back. But I don't think my hope is going to come true, Ivan added. Bridget told us that she, too, believes Renee is no longer alive. I guess you get to that point where you wonder what else can you do? Where else can you go? She said. I still try to post things on the Facebook page. Captain Wells told us that Renee's case is still considered an active missing persons investigation at the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office. It's definitely one of the weirdest cases I've ever worked. There's been a lot of late nights trying to think of something to do, he told us. It's one of those cases where the more you look, the more questions you have. When I describe this case to people, I use the word odd over 57 times, he added. But that's what it is. Odd. Captain Wells says he hopes that authorities can one day make an arrest in Renee's case. Whether that day comes sooner or later, Ivan said he will always remember his daughter as the nice, intelligent and artistic woman she was. I never dreamed any of this would ever happen to me. I wish none of it had ever happened. But you can't go back in time, he said. Janet Renee Field is described as being 5'7" and weighing 130 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She has short blonde hair and blue eyes. If you have any information on details surrounding Renee's disappearance, please call the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office at 434-589-8211.